Shabbos Kodesh Habo Aleinu L'Toivo, Shabbos Shkolim. And we once again read last week's Parsha, Ki Tiso. And so we will be briefly discussing the Mitzvah of Machatzis HaShekel and also the Minag Bizman Hazeh that the Ramor brings in Tov Reish Tzadik Daled, Zecher LeMachatzis HaShekel. So the Pasuk says, V'nosnu ish koifer nafshoi Machatzis HaShekel v'lo yeh bohem negev b'fkoidoisam ha'oshi lo yarba v'hadal lo yamit. The wealthy can't give more and the poor can't give less. Is this a lo ta'aseh? The Rambam, Sefer HaMitzvos, Mitzvah Kuf Ayin Aleph, in the list of 613 Taryag Mitzvahs, the Rambam has only one slot for Machatzis HaShekel, and that is Mitzvah Kuf Ayin Aleph. והמצווה קוף עין א' שציוונו לעשות מחצית השקל בכל שונו, והוא אמור יזבולה, ונשנו איש כופר נפשו, זה ייתנו כל הפיקודים, והוא מבואר שמצווה זו אין נשים חייבות בה, שהכוסף הוא כל העובר על הפיקודים, וכבר הסברו משפטי מצווה זו במסכת המחוברת, כלומר מסכת שקולים, שמצווה זו אינו נהגס אלו בפני הבייס, because it's all about korbanos tzibur. Why does the Rambam need to say that the mitzvah is only b'zman habayis? Wouldn't that be so simple? If Machatzis HaShekel is to buy korbanos, no Beis Mikdash, no korbanos, no Machatzis HaShekel. So in Minchas Osha and Shemois, I do not recall which siman, but on Parshas Ki Tiso, I asked, why is Masechet Shkolim in Seder Moyed and not in Seder Kodshim? And why does the Rambam write Hilchos Shkolim in Sefer Azmanim and not in Sefer HaKorbonos or in Sefer Avoido? Sefer Avoido is all about Avodas HaMikdash. Sefer HaKorbonos is about the Korbonos. So many times I say with a little drop of humor, if the Rambam would turn to me and he would say, I was mavarer all the halachas in Torah and I mamish don't need your help in bitter halacha. I don't need you. And I paskened every shaila that might come up in Jewish life. Something no one before him did and no one after him did, the entirety of Torah, Zroim, Kodshim, Taharos. But just do me a favor, a technical favor. Here are the halachas. I decided that everything fits into 14 categories. You Dalet Svora Mishnah Torah. You just be Masada the halachas in these 14 categories. I said many times, I would put Hallel into Sefer Ahava, together with Brachos, Tefillah, Kriya Shema, Hallel, and the Rambam decided no. Does anybody know where all the halachas of Hallel are in Rambam? In Hilchos Chanukah. And that is why the Rambam didn't ask me for that favor. So to me, I would put Hilchos Shkolim either in Avodah or in Korbanos. But no, it's in Zmanim, together with Hilchos Pesach and Hilchos Shabbos and Hilchos Yom Tov. Why in Zmanim? So what I wanted to argue is, the mitzvah of Machatzis HaShekel is once a year. Be'echad ba'odor, you need to give. It's up to Hegdish, what Hegdish needs to do with that money, but it's not you. You're not buying korbanos. That's none of your business. That is a din on Hegdish. Where does Hegdish get korbanos? We have a lot of money. We have Trumas Alishka. It's not a purchase. And when you give Machatzis HaShekel, it's not that you are responsible to buy korbanos. You, once a year, need to give a matona l'mikdash. What does the Beis HaMikdash do with that money? They buy korbanos. And therefore, this is like any other halacha of chagim v'moyadim. And that is why Rabbeinu HaKodesh put Masechet Shkolim in Seder Moed, and the Rambam writes Shkolim in Sefer Zemanim. So the Rambam says, one mitzvah to say, my son-in-law that did the Maramakoimis messed things up twice. It's not the right Ramban. The Ramban says there's a lotasa as well. Ha'osher lo yarba, v'adal lo yamit, is a lotasa. So why doesn't the Rambam comment on the Why doesn't the Ramban comment on the Rambam and Sefer HaMitzvahs? Like he does, L'orkoi v'lerochboi, Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Rambam adds on, subtracts. So if the Ramban feels, Ha'osher lo yarba, v'adal lo yamit is a lav, why doesn't he make this comment on Sefer HaMitzvahs? And that is why I think that the Ramban writes Vishemo, maybe. And he writes, maybe it's not a lav. Maybe the Torah means to say, Osher lo yarba v'adal lo yamit, the rich can't give more, and the poor can't give less. Because if those that give Machatzis HaShekel are a purchase, and we take your money to buy, then Osher lo yarba v'adal lo yamit would be a lav. But the Torah says the Osher cannot give more, and the Oni cannot give less, because whatever you give and how much you give won't affect at all how much of the korban you get. There's nothing to do. So the Torah means to say, you give Machatzis HaShekel, but don't think if you give more, you're getting more, and if you give less, you're getting less. So in a partnership, the more money you invest, the more shares you have. So the Torah says, no, by korbanos it doesn't go that way. You give more, you're not getting anything more in return. You're going to give less, you're not going to get anything less in return, because you're just giving for the Beis HaMikdash. And when we buy korbanos tzibur, everybody is the same. So the Ramban al Torah writes this Vishemo. But I think that is his firm opinion, and that is why when it came to Sefer HaMitzvahs, he doesn't write any comment on the Rambam. And he leaves one mitzvah to say, and that is all. Tashbetz Zohar Harakia. I think he was the last of Moinei HaMitzvahs. This endeavor, trying to determine what are the Taryag mitzvahs, who knows who was the first one to write a Sefer mitzvahs? Who was the first Sefer mitzvahs that we have? Does anybody know? The Bahag, Rav Yehudai Gaon, and his contemporary, Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon. Is anybody familiar with Sefer mitzvahs Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon? I would be surprised if you are. Many times I say, Rabbi Yerucham Fischel Perlo, Baal Machaber Sefer HaMitzvahs Lerasag. And this is an interesting phenomenon. Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon wrote Sefer HaMitzvahs, but Rabbi Fischel Perlo wasn't aware of that. Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon, like many of the early Sephardi giants, was a Ish Eshkolot. He was everything. He was the greatest Rosh Hashiva in Bavel. And in those days, being a Rosh Hashiva didn't mean you're teaching 3 blatten Bova Metzia, 4 blatten Bova Kama, and 5.5 blatten Ksubis. The Rosh Hashiva in Bavel was the Poisek Ador and the greatest Marbitz Torah. He was everything. Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon was the greatest Jewish philosopher before the Rambam. Does anybody know what's the name of Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon's Sefer in Jewish philosophy? Through the years, I've been asking you so many questions that you might as well remember the answers. So Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon wrote Sefer Ha'amunois V'Hadeyois. And the Rambam Memori Nevuchim follows in his footsteps. He was also a mishorer and a paitan, a poet. And he writes charuzim on Taryag mitzvahs. And the official Pelo was only aware of that piyut, of that charuz. and he takes a song and he develops it into Sefer HaMitzvahs. He wasn't aware that Rabbeinu Sadi Gaon actually wrote a Sefer HaMitzvahs. And there are quite a few discrepancies between Reb Fischel Perlo's interpretation of the song and the actual Sefer HaMitzvahs of Rasag, which is a very interesting study. But anyway, the first two were Rav Yehudai Gaon, the Bahag, and Rav Sadia Gaon. And then Balei HaTosfos. How many Sifrei HaMitzvahs do we have from Balei HaTosfos? Who knows? The Smag and the Smak. Sefer Mitzvahs Godol and Sefer Mitzvahs Koton. And the Yereim, Rebbe Elazar Memetz. And then the Rambam and the Ramban. And the last was the Tashbetz and Zohar HaRokiya. V'yesh mistapkim בשני לאווים הנאמרים בשקולים, אם הם נכנסים במניין או לא, והם או שלא ירבה, והדה לא ימת. So he writes, maybe we should count 3 mitzvahs for Machatzis HaShekel. The mitzvahs say, and yesh mistapkim, some are in question, maybe o shelo yarba, v'hada lo yamet are 2 different lavim, not only one. So the Rambam says no lav. The Ramban first says it's a lav, but then he says maybe it's not. Tashbet says maybe 2 lavim. Sefer Yereim doesn't count Machatzis HaShekel at all. Why does he omit this mitzvah? So the Gaon in Sefer Aderes Eliyahu writes, Pashas Ki Tiso was not a mitzvah sasei l'doros. It was just because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to count the Jewish people. And you're not allowed to count the Jewish people. And that is why it was just Heroes Shah. Let them give Machatzis HaShekel. You're going to count how much money came in. And you'll know the number of people. And therefore, it's not a mitzvah l'doros, not even in the days of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gaon also says the Truma in Pashas Truma was also one time, only Bakomes HaMishkan. The mitzvah of Machatzis HaShekel is Halacha LaMoshe Messinai. Halacha LaMoshe Messinai is never part of the Taryag. Taryag mitzvahs are only Taryag mitzvahs HaMefuroshim B'Toras Moshe. And that would explain why the Yereim doesn't bring this mitzvah at all. We skipped to source number 8, B'Samim Roish. V'noshim p'turois mitfilas hamusofim. The zois atfila eina bo ela mishim zeicha lechiyah v'karbonos. V'ishu lo hayta shokelet. Ve'ein lehem chelek b'karbonos tzibor. So women are exempt from musaf. Because musaf is associated with the korban. Korban tzibor. If noshim are potter from Machatzis HaShekel, they don't have a chelek in karbonos tzibor, so they're potter from musaf. The Ramah Tov Reish Tzadik Dalet brings the minag of Zeichel HaMachatzis HaShekel. It is an Ashkenazi minag. The Beis Yosef doesn't bring it. And the Ramah writes that only from 20 years and up do you need to give Machatzis HaShekel. Why is that? Mechloikes Rishonim. The Ramban al Torah writes from the Bar Mitzvah like any other mitzvah. But the Rosh holds kolo oiver ala pikudim. And in the Midbar, they only counted from 20 years and up. So only from the age 20, you're chayiv in Machatzis HaShekel. If the Besamim Rosh is right, then we would say only from 20 years and up, you're chayiv in Musaf. So I don't know how old our Talmidim are, but I would guess that 50% of the yeshiva Rosh Chodesh could walk out, go to the dining room, because anybody that's not 20 years old is potter from Musaf. Would seem strange. The Torah Tamima, who knows who was the Torah Tamima? What? Yeah, whose son was he? Yeah, son of the Aruch HaShulchan, Baruch Epstein. He was a banker. big Talmud Chacham. He was offered rabbinical positions, but he didn't want to be a Rav. So he writes in Torah Tamim Parshas Kitiso that we should be makbid, that a shliach tzibur for Musaf should be 20 years old. We never heard of such a chumrah. I don't recommend to the Rosh Yeshiva that you adopt this minig in yeshiva, that Musaf only from 20 years and up. Lo shomanu velo ra'inu. So there's a machlokes in the Mishnah Shkolim whether koyanim are chayev and Machatzis HaShekel. So we would exempt all the koyanim from Musaf. And we would say that a kohen can be a shliach tzibur for Musaf because maybe he's put, it doesn't make sense. So obviously, one of two pshotim. Either we would say, even those that don't have a chelek in korban and tzibur still are chayiv in tfilas hatzibur. Because when Chazal said, noshim chayav ois betfilah, they made no exceptions. Loi plug. And even those that did not have a chelek in Musaf, in Korban Musaf, still are chayiv in Tfilas Musaf. But I think the more powerful argument would be everybody, every Jew has a chelek in Korban or Tzibur, whether you gave Machatzis HaShekel or not. Which means part of the people need to fund Korbanos Tzibur for all the people. But korban is tzibur kreivim b'shvil kol Yisrael. Echad anoshim ve'echad noshim, echad gedolim ve'echad ketanim. Whether you're chayiv in Machatzis HaShekel or not, you have a chelek in korban and tzibur. And this brings me back to my very first comment. It's not that you pay for the korban when you give Machatzis HaShekel. Machatzis HaShekel is a gift. It's a gift for the Beis HaMikdash. Hegdish buys korbanos from this money. But it's not that you're paying for your korban. It's not like korban Pesach. Korban Pesach korev b'chabura. Korban Pesach is a shutfis. If you pay, you have a chelek in korban. If you don't pay, then you're out. It's not the same but korban tzibur. Korban Pesach is a korban yochid. It's not a korban tzibur. Korban Pesach is unique. It's the only korban yochid she'eino bo ela b'chabura. A yochid should not bring a korban Pesach. But essentially, it's not a korban tzibur. So korban Pesach is a shutvis. If you pay, you have part. It's not the same but korban tzibur. And that is why it's in Seder Zmanim and not in Seder Kodshim. Machatzis HaShekel is a chiyuv to donate. This is a donation to the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash used the money to buy korban tzibur. And korban tzibur is for everyone. Those that paid and those that didn't pay. And that is why the B'somim Rosh isn't right. Noshim, if they're chayiv in shachas mincha marev, they're chayiv in korban in tfilas musaf as well. And that is why no posek says this. So I don't know whether you're familiar with the Sefer B'somim Rosh, but I think I mentioned this in the past. כפי הנראה, B'somim Rosh לא היה ולא נברא ואינו אלא מושל. The Sefer came out more than 200 years ago by a Talmud Chacham whose name was Reb Shol, and he was Rav in Amsterdam. And he writes that he found a Ksav Yad that was in the possession of Rabbi Yitzchok di Molino 300 years earlier, in the days of the Beis Yosef. And it is a compilation of 392 tshuvas written by the Rosh. And he published that sefer with his comments and footnotes named Kaseh the Harsana. And he named the sefer B'somim Rosh because B'somim is B'gematria 392. And he claimed that the tshuvas were written by the Rosh, and that is why he named the sefer B'somim Rosh. When the sefer came out, Reb Mordechai Bennett immediately wrote that it's a forgery, it's not authentic, and he even argues that there are some things in that sefer which are not only questionable, but awful. And he said, this is a sefer you cannot bring into your home. Al tishkan be'aholcho avlo. And in Shalas Teshuvas Proshes Mordechai, from Reb Mordechai Bennett, Siman Hay, there's a letter that Reb Mordechai Bennett wrote to Reb Tzvi Hersh Berlin, who was the father of the publisher. And it's an interesting tshuva. I try to imagine how Reb Tzvi Hersh Berlin feels when he gets this letter. So the letter starts off with Toarei Kavod that are rarely seen. And Reb Mordechai Bennett writes him such gewaltige titles. So when he starts reading this letter, probably he feels very honored that Reb Mordechai Bennett, one of the greatest gedolim of his time, writes to him such amazing titles. But as he proceeds to read the letter, Chashchuenav, because Reb Mordechai Bennett in this letter tears the Sefer apart, and he says, it's not only a forgery, Ruach Minus, and it's an awful Sefer. Why did Reb Mordechai Bennett write this letter to the father of the publisher? I don't know. But that's the fact. Shuvas Chasam Sofer Achaim Semakuf Nun Daled. Chasam Sofer refers to Kizbei Harosh with a Zayin. Kizbei Harosh. And one publisher going back 160 years thought that it's a Torah Satfus, and he wrote Kizbei Harosh, but he wasn't aware that there are two other tshuvas in Chasam Sofer, Yoredei Shin Chovov, Even Ezer Chelek Aleph Samech Tet, in which the Chasam Sofer clearly writes that it's a forgery, it's not authentic. And when he wrote Kizbei Harosh, he wrote what he meant, with a Zayin and not with a Tov. Beis Meir, Rav Meir Posner, one of the Choshevs this forum on Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tov Nun Gimel, also comes out against the Sefer because the Psumim Rosh is Mezalzel and the minig of Kitnias, and he writes it's a minig of the Karaites, of the Karoim, which the Achronim very much opposed. The Chido in Shem Gedolim brings the Sefer, and he writes the Sefer was questionable, but I saw a letter from Reb Tzvi Hersh from Berlin, the father of the publisher, and he writes the Sefer was in my home 10 years, and I checked it out, and it's authentic. And the Chidu writes, I believe Reb Tzvi Hersh from Berlin. Rebbe Kiva Eger, Siman Tet in the Tshuvas, Siman Kuvov Shulchan Aruch Harachaim, quotes this Chiddush from the Besumim Rosh. So I don't know what to say at the end of the day. Rebbe Kiva Eger brings him, the Chido believes him, Reb Mordechai Bennett says, Chas v'sholem, I'm an Einikel of Reb Mordechai Bennett. And he says, you're not allowed to have the Sefer at home. I do have it. First of all, it's interesting. It's an interesting historical document. But it doesn't really have any halachic bearing because anybody familiar with Shuvas HaRosh sees this is not the Rosh. It's not the same style. It's not the same writing. So some people feel Reb Shaul Amsterdam had a lot of Chidushim, and he thought, if I'm going to print my Chidushim, who's going to buy it? But everybody will want to buy Shuvas HaRosh. So he made up Shuvas HaRosh to fit his Chidushim. Whenever he had a wonderful Chiddush, he thought, Zochan la'odem shaloi b'fonov. And maybe Zochan la'odem shaloi b'fonov even le'yachar moisoi. But Reb Mordechai Bennett says, Zochan la'odem shaloi b'fonov, aval ein choven lo la'odem shaloi b'fonov, and you can't do this. So that's the historical controversy about Besumim Rosh. But this Chiddush is unreasonable because if Noshim are potter from Musaf, according to some Rishonim, till you're 20 years you're potter, and according to Ben Buchi and Mesechet Shkolim, Koyanim are potter from Musaf, velo shamanu, velo ra'inu. So the Ramah brings Minig Ashkenaz that we give Zeichel a Machatzis HaShekel. And there's a question, when do we do that? The Ramah writes, Leil Purim lifnei tfilas mincha. How could you give Machatzis HaShekel b'Leil Purim lifnei mincha? Only if you're a tzanzer or a satmar chosid could you do that. and you daven mincha before Rabbeinu Tam la'achat seisakei chovim, so you could give Machatzis HaShekel beleil Purim lefnei tfilas mincha. But most people, especially in Eretz Yisrael, daven mincha before the shkia. But it's obviously clear what the Ramo means. He means Beknisas Hayoim Purim, at the end of Tanas Esther, before Mincha. Rabbi Yankov Emden says better after Mincha, after the Shkia, when it's already Purim. The Goin in Biragra, just as Mitzayin, Ayin Perekame de Brochus. What does he mean? There's nothing in the first Perek of Brochus that has a kesher with Machatzis HaShekel besides Brochus Davov. Agre de Tanesa, Tzidkosa. This Gemara says, in a fast day, you should give tzedakah. That is why the Ramo says preferable to give Machatzis HaShekel before Mincha when it's still Tanas Esther. So Machatzis HaShekel is associated with Purim. But it's better to give before Mincha, which is still Tanas Esther, because Agre de Tanesa. Rabbi Yankov Emden says no. It's associated with Purim. Better Purim, liachar hashkia. This year Purim falls on Sunday. Tanas Esther is Thursday. So when do we give Machatzis HaShekel? Tanas Esther, Agre de Tanesa, or Mitzvah Shabbos, which is Leil Purim. Yerushalayim, we have Purim on Monday. And every year, Erev Purim in Yerushalayim, Mukofan is not Tanas Esther. There's a day between Tanas Esther and Purim. So when do we give Machatzis HaShekel? Leil Purim. Because Machatzis HaShekel is more clearly associated with Purim than with Tanas Esther. All the Goan means to explain in the Ramo is, when the question is before Mincha or after Mincha, better before Mincha. But when there's a different day, there's a day between Purim and Tanas Esther, Purim. The Divrei Yatzev, and who knows who is the Divrei Yatzev? Who wrote Shalosh Ketuvos Divrei Yatzev? Moiri Verabi, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, and a Simeresh Tzadik Gimel, and his Chuvas he writes that it is better to give Machatzis HaShekel both Tanas Esther and Leil Purim. If there's a day between them, do it twice. Tanas Esther and Purim. To be Yotzei the Ramo, the Gra, Agre de Tanesa, and the other Shitta, Reb Michal Tekachinsky, Luach Eretz Yisrael writes, Minig Eretz Yisrael, like Rabbi Yankov Emden, that we give after Mincha. So Machatzis HaShekel goes to Aniyim, and the Balei Drush come up with a beautiful idea. The word Machatzis is 5 letters. The middle letter is a tzaddik, and that's a remez for tzedakah. The 2 outer letters in the extremities are a mem and a tov, which is mace. The inner letters, ches yud, which is chai. And it comes to indicate that in the koyach of tzedakah, we are marchik, malach hamavis, and we separate the men from the tov. How do we separate them? By bringing together the chet and the yud, which is chai. Like the Posuk says, v'tzedakah tatzel memavis. So one of the great segulas for refuas and yeshuas for life is tzedakah. And above Abased Afyud Aleph, Chazal tell a story of Binyamin HaTzadik, Shahoyu Gabay Shel Tzedakah. And the Gemara says, Maaseh Binyamin HaTzadik, Shahoyu Gabay Shel Tzedakah, V'pa'am achas boso isha lefonav, V'amru Rebbe Parnaseini. A woman came and she asked for money. And he said, we don't have any money right now. Come back next week. We have a campaign going on. And she says, Rebbe, im ein atu mefarneseni, isho v'shivo b'neo mesim barov. Either she was a widow she was taking care of 7 children. There was no father. And she says, Rebbe, if you're not going to help me, I and my 7 children might die from hunger. Omed ve'pernaso mishalo. What could you do when you hear such words? So he gave her his own money. He wasn't obliged to do that. He was a gabe shel tzedakah. Short time after, the Gemara says, Cholo ben Yomen HaTzadik v'not elomus. He fell desperately ill and he was dying. Malachi HaShoros came before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The angels came before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and they said, this cannot be. Rabbeinu shel olam, atu amarta. Kol hamakayim nefesh achas miyisrael ki lo kiyem olam olei. V'tzadik zeh shehichlu shmoine nefoshes b'Yisrael yamut b'yamim ma'atim. He was young, Binyamin HaTzadik. And the angel said, he saved 8 worlds. Rabbeinu shel olam, you are the one that teaches us hamakayim nefesh achas miyisrael. Every Jew is a world. So how could it be he should die at such a young age? Miyad nikra gzar dinoi. And he had a miraculous recovery. And not only that, Amrila, Hosifu Lochov Beishonim al Shanoisav. 22 years were added to what he was originally destined to live. And we see the koyach of tzedakah, La'orer Rachamei Shamayim. And whenever I quote this story from the Gemara, I must say the unbelievable pshat of the Gra. So the Gaon says, why 22 years? The Maharal teaches us that no number is coincidental. And whenever we find a number in Toras Moshe, Nevi'im v'Ksuvim, even in Agodas Chazal, there is essence to numbers. And there must be a reason why Chav Beis Shonim. So the Gaon has a remarkable cheshbon. So the Gemara in Bava Basra Daf Tes says, "Anoisim pruteloni misborach b'shishu brachos, v'amafaisa b'dvorim misborach b'yud aleph." Whenever you give tzedakah, you get 6 brachos. And if you give tzedakah with sever ponim yafos, one of the most unpleasant experiences is stretching out your hand and ask for nedavis. So when you give tzedakah, you need to give tzedakah with a smile on your face. And you need to give the person, the recipient, a feeling that he's doing you a favor and you're so happy to give him tzedakah. Hamafaisa b'dvorim misborach b'yud aleph brochas. So the Gaon says, Binyamin HaTzadik definitely gave tzedakah in the most beautiful fashion. And how many people did he save? 8. Isha v'shiva boneo. 8 times 11 is 88. And the Gemara in Shlita says, Schus toilo gimel chadoshim. Every brocha, every schus gives you 3 months of life. 3 times 88 is 264. And that is exactly Chav Beis Shonim. 12 times 22 is 264. And that is Shmoine Nefoshes Yud Aleph Brochas times 3, which is Gimel Chadoshim, and that is why Yosifulo Chav Beis Shonim Al Shenotav. And that's a beautiful pshat. But what we see from the Gemara is the power of tzedakah, and especially when you give tzedakah b'seva ponim yafos. So we are still in the middle of this terrible war, and we are looking for zgulas. What else could we do to be ma'orer rachamei shamayim? So we're learning, we're davening, we try to enhance achdus, ava v'achva v'sholem v'reus, and especially Purim. The Monas Halevi, Marash al-Kabetz, as very well known, says that the mitzvah of Mishloach Monas is lahar bois achavo v'reus. And my feeling is, why dafke Purim? Because Purim is all about being salvaged from a terrible gzeira of destruction and annihilation. Pesach is about Yetzias Mitzrayim. Chanukah is Nes Pach HaShemen, Purim is only about lahashmed, lahareg, or leyabed, and bittul gzeiros. And in time of gzeiros, when Klal Yisrael is a zakona, what is most needed is achva v'reus, and that's the mitzvah of mishloach monos. And tzedakah. So Machatzis HaShekel is lo yeh bohem negev befkoid oisam, and tzedakah is the greatest gula to be ma'orer rachamei shamayim. So Yirosim, we should be zoichem. The Sfas Emes writes in the Stoides Purim, and I think I mentioned this last week, that every year in Chodesh Odor, as the days of Purim come closer, every year there's this gula of v'nahafeichu asher yishletu haYehudim heimo b'soineihem, and we should be zoichet to see miracles. We should be zoichet to see nisim v'neflois v'kodesh Baruch yerachem al amo, in the schus of our Torah and our tefillas and our chesed. And chesed is not only money. There is so much chesed that you could do in yeshiva with your friends. Sometimes a smile means so much, and a good word means so much, and having chavrusa with a boy that is having a hard time means so much. So tzedakah is gemilas chasodim, and it's begufoy ubememoinoi. And in the schus of our chesed, Kodesh Baruch Hu Sharav Rachmones, and we should see miracles and nisim and aflois. Hu Rachamon Hu Yasalonu nisim and aflois. Kishem she'osisu la'avoseinu b'yom ha'meheim u'bezman hazeh. We should be zercha b'korov to see Pnei Moshiach tzedkeinu b'mheiro v'yomeinu. Amen.